Welcome back to Let's Make a Game, a channel about making computer role-playing games using the free program Twine and the Sugarcube format for Twine. In this video, I would like to keep talking about my ongoing project of adapting the fighting fantasy rules to a Twine game using the Sword and Planet subgenre of science fiction to inspire the setting and plot. However, before I do that, I'd like to briefly address something that I talked about a little bit in the previous video, which is volume problems. More than one person has commented that they find the videos really soft, and some people say that they have to turn it right up, and then that means that the ads are really loud, or at least one person has said that. And I have a very low budget for doing these videos, and so while I'm aware of the problem, and while I certainly have been looking into how to fix the problem, thus far I haven't been able to find a solution that is within my budget. However, last video I did try using an external mic instead of just the built-in mic of the computer, and I did get one bit of feedback that said that they thought that it sounded better with that microphone. So I'm going to continue using the microphone, and there's also, I've been recommended a couple of programs that I might look into that people online have told me are better than the one I'm currently using. So if that turns out to be true, well, hopefully I can improve it still more. So the short summary of all that is that I'm aware of the problem. I know the problem isn't fixed, but I am doing my best to try and fix it. So, getting on to the actual program and my progress on it. So here we have a game that's partway through. The story is all in brackets, which, as I've said before, is my code for I haven't quite written the exact wording yet. I've just sort of written what happens for my own notes. But here we have a situation where the player character has spent some time among the alien hunter-gatherers and is now leaving them. And they present the player character with 10 coins wrapped in a piece of cloth. And if we look at the sidebar where the character's details are listed, we can see that indeed we have a new entry. We have coins 10. So money in a typical fighting fantasy story, in my experience, money is a factor, and often it's a very important factor. There are opportunities to gain money. You might steal it, you might earn it, you might take it from foes that you kill or drive off, and you have opportunities to spend it, and often what you spend it on will make a big difference later on in the game. So you might go to a market and you can buy boots or a candle, and that costs, boots cost say 10 gold pieces, and a candle costs 3 gold pieces, and there's a blanket that costs 4 gold pieces, and there's a flute that costs 5. And then later on in the game, you might find that some of these are just sort of red herrings and don't do anything, and they're just a waste of money. But then there might be a situation later in the game where the flute turns out to be magic and it can calm down an animal that would otherwise attack you or something like that. And some of the items might be actually vital for completing the adventure. You live or die based on whether you have a blanket or whether you bought the red key or the green key or something earlier on in the game. That is, it's not really how the stories upon which fighting fantasy is ultimately based work, but it sort of makes sense in terms of the setting. So what I mean by that is fighting fantasy, the original inspiration from it was probably basically Dungeons and Dragons, that sort of world. Dungeons and Dragons is ultimately based on probably mostly stories like Conan, Fafford and the Grey Mouser by Fritz Lieber. A little bit Lord of the Rings, but probably less so them. And those characters certainly live in a money economy and certainly are motivated by money and by the lack of money. We often hear that, Fafford and the Grey Mouse had a lean old winter and it was getting cold and they didn't have any money left, and so therefore they were forced to try and look for whatever employment they could. Or Conan hears about this great treasure and he's motivated to try and steal it. They're often doing things for money. It's the puzzle, or the sort of the decision about buying items and which item is going to solve, which item gets you through the puzzle. That doesn't really fit the stories that well. Conan pretty much gets through because A, he's sort of this great swordsman. B, he's just lucky. He has, as it were, plot armor. He is the main character and the author doesn't want to kill him. C, people fall in love with him. Women fall in love with him and therefore help him out. But I don't know of any case where Conan survives because he bought a thing and he would have died if he hadn't bought that thing. That is a sort of addition, because to have a game you need to have puzzles. And what I mean by puzzles is not just, you can have literally puzzles as in the character in the story has to solve a puzzle. But I also mean plot elements that are effectively puzzles. Like, for example, you're leading a group of mercenaries across the mountains and you have to decide whether to keep them on full rations or go down to half rations, or go down to half rations but you sneak full rations yourself. And then if you go on half rations, their morale is going to be lower, and so that might have different effects. If you keep them on full rations, well, they'll have a higher morale, but you'll obviously run out of food more quickly, right? That sort of decision is effectively a puzzle when it's presented in a game and when the player character is making the decision. Even though it's not in the fiction of the game, the Conan or whoever is experiencing that wouldn't say, I had to solve a puzzle. They would say, well, I had this decision to make about how to deal with our rations. So that's what I mean by puzzles. Those sort of puzzles don't have a big part of the original fiction that fighting fantasy is drawing on. But it does make sense to add them because the characters are often dealing with money. It doesn't seem out of place to have the characters gaining and losing money, because gaining and losing money is a thing that they do, even though it's not so much, that's not the vital element of the plot. It's really more what sets off the plot. In the original fiction, you'd find a typical sword and sorcery hero. It would probably begin with, it had been a terrible year and this character hadn't found any employment and he was nearly starving. And that's what motivates him to do the thing that is the main plot, rather than that being a sort of part of... It incites the plot, I guess. It incites the conflict. But it isn't the thing that the character has to deal with. The thing the character has to deal with is, well, because he was starving, he decided to steal from a rich person's house. But it turns out that the house that he went into was the house of a horrible wizard, and the thing that he has to deal with is the horrible magic that the wizard has, or the wizard captures him and forces him to something, and that's the thing that he has to deal with. Sword and Planet, money doesn't play as big a role as it does in sword and sorcery type of fiction. As an example, I have read at least most of the John Carter of Mars or Barsoom series by Edgar Rice Burroughs, and I don't know what money on Mars is called, what the coins are, or even if they are coins, and I don't even really know if they have money. And Edgar Rice Burroughs loves giving you alien terms for things. He loves telling you, well, the ruler of a city is called a Jed, and a mercenary is called a Panthan, and this animal is a Thoat, and it looks sort of like a lion, but it's kind of a riding animal as well. He loves giving you, and these guys are called the Therns, and these guys are called the Tharks. He loves sort of giving you Martian terms for things. But in my reading, he has never given the term for money. It, maybe it exists. I think maybe there are merchants. I don't even know off the top of my head. It's certainly not something that he's interested in. He being Edgar Rice Burroughs, and also he being John Carter. John Carter never says, I wish I had more money and then I could have a big house and people would admire me. John Carter wants status and respect, but status and respect is not gained by having money. Status and respect is gained by being a effective fighter and a sort of and sticking to a code of honor, basically. Which isn't very realistic if it's a money economy. I mean, if it's a money economy, money really is status in the real world. But in this world of Barsoom, maybe they have money, but they certainly don't. It's not the center of their lives. It's not something that Edgar Rice Burroughs was very interested in writing about, and as a result, it's not something that the characters are very interested in pursuing. He's never pursuing a treasure. He's never broke and sort of dealing with the fact that he's broke. Particularly, he does go. They can have money problems on Earth. I should say that's how the Barsoom series is. Later writers seem to have really stuck to that. I don't know of any Sword and Planet story where money plays a big role, or where a treasure plays a big role, or where somebody is acting in the hope of getting a good job or something like that. People are motivated by sort of honor, chivalry, I guess, and a desire to prove themselves to themselves and prove themselves to others, but especially to prove themselves to the woman that they fall in love with as soon as they see them. And those women are not impressed by money. They're impressed by honor and chivalry and being rescued when someone kidnaps them, etc., etc. So having money and having a lot of are you going to buy this or this, and what are you going to do about this money, and that would, in this story, which is meant to be a Sword and Planet story, it would be much more out of place than it would be in a typical sort of fantasy story that ultimately comes from sword and sorcery, from Conan or from Fafhrd. A fantasy story that comes from Lord of the Rings, well, that's in one way that's more like Sword and Planet, in that there are hoards. There are certainly, like in The Hobbit, there's a great big hoard of treasure, and it motivates a lot of the characters. But we are meant to understand that they are wrong to be motivated by that hoard. And that's never true in Conan. You never get the impression, or I never got the impression, that we're meant to think that Conan is wrong for wanting to have a treasure, even if his way of getting the treasure is breaking into someone's house and stealing it. Whereas in Tolkien, taken as a whole, there are hoards, but it's typically a flaw to be too interested in them. You can't imagine Aragorn or Boromir being all that motivated by the desire for wealth. You can imagine them being motivated by love. You can imagine them being motivated by a desire to prove themselves to be sort of honourable men. You can imagine them being motivated perhaps by some sort of family disgrace. My father's father was a terrible coward, and I want to prove that I'm brave, so that I want to prove that I'm sort of not I haven't inherited that characteristic or something. But it would be very strange to me, I think, to have a character who was motivated by gold, and that wasn't a sign of their moral decline. Like if you had a heroic character in Lord of the Rings and they started to become very, very interested in gathering gold, I think you would understand that that's how Sauron's got to them. That's how they've been corrupted, because they shouldn't be motivated by that. They should be motivated by love and honor and sort of intangible things. And I think maybe that's one reason why fantasy, even though it uses the surface, fantasy gaming uses a lot of surface elements from Lord of the Rings. There are dwarves and there are elves, and they're very much like the dwarves and elves in Lord of the Rings. They look like them anyway, and they, they have similar names and so on. But it doesn't take on that sort of everyone's motivated by honor thing. No, it's very sword and sorcery. Everyone's motivated by gold, pretty much. Everyone's expected to be motivated by gold. That's why you go down in dungeons. You're not going down in the dungeon so that your family name will be respected and so that your children will be sort of proud of you. You're going down there because you're broke and you want to be rich by default, I guess. And sometimes that was a kind of clash, because of course a lot of the people who took up fantasy gaming were interested in Lord of the Rings, and so sometimes there's a sort of gap between I'm a paladin, I'm a heroic chivalrous knight, but also I spend my life going in caves hoping to kill some monsters, and I do that because I hope to take their gold. It doesn't sort of quite fit, or at least to me it doesn't seem. It seems a bit incongruous. But anyway, that's a little bit off the track. The point is that money plays very little role in Sword and Planet stories, and yet I have decided to use it. And the reason I've decided to use it is because I've decided that you go to, or that you probably will end up in, at least if you live long enough, if the character lives long enough, they will end up in a city. And perhaps I'm thinking in more sort of, I'm perhaps thinking more concretely than most writers of this genre, right? I don't think Edgar Rice Burroughs was interested in creating a realistic economy. And I'm thinking, well, if there's a city, there's probably going to be some sort of money economy. And so money is going to play a role, but probably less of a role than you might expect if you've played some of the fantasy themed fighting fantasy books. And the way that it's introduced is that when you leave, you don't start with money. In a lot of fighting fantasy stories, you start with 10 gold pieces or 20 gold pieces or whatever. That wouldn't make any sense in this case, because you are being transported to, you the player character, I mean, are transported to this alien planet. So, of course, you're not going to have whatever they use for money there. So you start with no money, and you might not get any money. In fact, it's probably more likely than not that you won't get any money before you come to the city. And it's if the hunter-gatherers respect you enough and you're lucky enough, if you roll a high enough number, then they might give you an item, I think it was a feathered staff, and or they might give you these coins. And the way that I'm thinking about money in terms of these ape-like hunter-gatherer aliens that are the first people that you might encounter is that they trade a little bit with people who come from the city. So occasionally there are traders who sort of venture into the jungle and might trade for their handicrafts or whatever it is, things they gather from the forest. And the hunter-gatherers have learnt that the people in the city value coins. And so over the years, they've sort of collected a small number of coins, which, among other things, they give to you as a sign of esteem. But it's not like that's the center of their world. They're not spending their time trying to get money or work out how to spend money. They're mostly hunting and gathering, but they sort of recognize, well, these coins, they don't really do anything, but when people come from the city, they value coins for some reason, and so we can offer them these coins, and if we give them 2 coins, they might give us a good blanket or something like that, something that is of use. So they have it because it's of use to other people. They have it as a thing that for some reason these other people value money, and so therefore, okay, we don't really know why, but we'll have money. Rather than because it's, as it would be for modern people, it's very much the center of what we do is the gaining of money and the spending of money. But because we have money, albeit in a reduced form, we need to have mechanics for money. We need to have a way of saying, let the character get a certain number of coins and display that on the sidebar, get the character to lose a certain number of coins, and then display that on the sidebar if that's a new total. We'll also need other mechanics like checking whether the character has a certain amount of money, giving the character the opportunity to buy things, etc. But for now, I'm just going to demonstrate the thing that I've actually coded, which is gaining or losing money. So let's have a look at that. So we'll be looking at three pages. Initialize, where we set up everything essentially, and especially where we set up the $S variable array, which is sort of probably the most important array, or at least the most complex array in the game. Main, where we deal with what the S array has encoded in it, and story caption, where we display the coins, or we display how the character is going, all of their attributes and what items they have, if any, and now what money they have, if any. So the variable that we're talking about is $CO, number of coins, if any, and of course it starts at 0. And as you probably know, if you've been following the series, the each entry in the $S array is basically the equivalent of a paragraph in a game book, and slot 0 is the text, if any, and then slot 1 is a number which tells you what is happening in this paragraph. So is this one where the story ends, or is this one where we have to change some attribute that the player has, or is this one where we just go straight on to another section, or does the player have a choice and they click a button to see which section they want to go to, and so on and so on. And one of the new numbers is 15, and 15 represents a change to the number of coins. And so it says here, number of coins changes by $S, $A2 to a minimum of 0. Then go to $S, $A3. So slot 0 is the text, or tells the computer that there will be no text. Slot 1 is the number 15, which says tells the computer this is going to be a change to the number of coins that the player has. And slot 2 is the change, so it's for example, 10 would mean you gain 10 coins, minus 5 would mean you lose 5 coins, and so on. And then slot 3 is where we go once we've done that. So I'll find an example. There it is. So let's zoom in a little bit so it's a bit more. There we go. The hunter-gatherers present you with 10 coins wrapped in a piece of cloth. So that's the text. Slot 1 is the number 15. Slot 1 is the number 10. So that means plus 10 coins. And then slot 3 is 1AN, which is just the name of one of the paragraphs, which is this one up here. So let's look at the code that allows that to happen, and then finally we'll look at the story caption. Although this is very simple, but I will show it to you anyway. So we go down to nearly to the very bottom. This code that I've highlighted here. If $S, $A, 1 is equal to 15. $A is where you are, which paragraph you're at. And then there's a note that says gain or lose coins. We set CO plus equals $S, $A2. So that just means set CO equal to its current value plus whatever's in there. It doesn't necessarily mean that the number increases, because the number in $S, $A2 could be a negative number. So it would add that negative number, which means it would decrease the total. And then we set $CO equal to math.max, and the M in math has to be a capital letter. So capital M, ATH dot MAX, and that just means the highest of whatever we've got within the brackets. So we have at least 2 things inside the brackets. You can have 3 or 4 or 5. In this case, I have 2. Usually it is 2. Set CO equal to the higher of $CO or 0. So let's say $S, $A2 was minus 10, and we had 5 coins before. Well, then that would mean $CO would be its current value, 5, plus $S, $A2 minus 10. That equals minus 5. The next line would be set CO equals math.max minus 5 or 0. Well, 0 is the highest out of those 2, or the higher out of those 2, and so we would set it to 0. Simply because you can't have negative money. Then we do what we often do. We change the value of A, in this case to what's in slot 3 in this particular part of the array. And then we include main, which means we go up to the top of this page again, and we deal with whatever the new paragraph is. All right. So the only thing left is story caption, and it's very straightforward. I've changed this around slightly. It's a little bit different to how it was. We have the skill, stamina, and luck, which are printed here. It looks complicated, but HTML tables always take up quite a lot of lines. What it's actually doing is quite simple. It's just printing the name of an attribute, a colon, and the value of a given attribute, and then it's finding another line. Or if it's lower than the initial value, it's printing like 3 out of 6 or something like that. If the highest value, the initial value was 6 and it's now 3, it's saying 3 out of 6. Not that that's a very realistic number. Well, let's say your skill started at 10 and went down to 7. It would say 7/10, meaning that it's currently 7 and its maximum and starting value is 10. And then once we've done all the attributes, we do the same thing for respect. If respect has a value, which is what if $H means. And then we do it for coins, and it's exactly the same code, just a coin. This is just an empty cell, a little 5 pixel wide sort of spacer cell to keep the different parts apart and make it look a bit more. It looks a bit crowded if you don't do that. Print CO. So if CO is greater than 0, then have a line where it says coins, colon, 5 or whatever it might be. And it's set up so that it's aligned with the skill and the stamina and luck and so on. And then down the bottom, this is items. And this is, so the respect and the coins are part of the HTML table, the same HTML table where the skill, stamina and luck are. And then the items are separate, and they're just printed in the middle of the page, or in this case, the sidebar, if the player happens to have a given item, its name is printed there to show that you've got it. And that is how we increase and decrease money. We're going to have to do other things with money as well, like give the player the opportunity to buy things and check if the player has money. So there's at least 2 functions that I haven't yet coded. But that sort of thing will probably only become relevant when the player gets to the city. And my plan is to finish the section with the alien hunter-gatherers in the jungle first and get that done and get on to testing it as quickly as possible. So we probably won't be dealing with money again for quite a few videos. We'll probably be looking at filling in more details of the current section where we're interacting with these hunter-gatherers and their life in the jungle. So I hope that was useful or interesting to at least some of you, and I hope you will tune in next time.